What's up, guys? I hope y'all are having a great day today, just full of so much positivity and happiness, dude, because we are back at it again with another modern AAA video game review, baby. And today on the chopping block is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle.
Now we have the opportunity to tell a new Indiana Jones story for a modern gaming audience.
Now, to say that I am mixed on this game is definitely an understatement, because there's things that I actually genuinely did like, and on the other hand, there are things I absolutely hated. I think what we have here is a video game that really did not need to be a video game, because I would say all of the areas that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle gets right have nothing to do with what makes a great video game, and instead we have another classic example like we've seen 100 times before with the current Sony movie game formula, where gameplay feels like an afterthought at best and serves basically as filler in between cutscenes and dialogue sequences, and that is exactly the camp that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle falls into. This is basically just a copy-paste of the Sony movie game format, but this time with absolutely horrible combat in between cutscenes and a first-person perspective that for some reason switches to third-person constantly whenever you're traversing the environment, which makes you wonder why wasn't this game just third-person in general, but it was probably to stave off the Uncharted comparisons. But I just want to say, I didn't absolutely hate my time with this game. I actually enjoyed a lot of what this game had to offer. I thought Troy Baker actually did a very good job emulating Harrison Ford for the most part. I actually thought they did a really good job at nailing that feel of the franchise for the most part. Obviously, there are some glaring issues that we'll get into a little bit later in this video, but I think they actually crafted a very faithful and, very believable follow-up to the Indiana Jones formula, much more so than Disney did. The issue with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle that I found myself feeling more and more the longer I played it is I was enjoying the parts of the game where I put down the controller and just watched what was happening on screen. In the back of my mind the entire time, I just could not shake the feeling that this would have been a better movie than a video game. And that is an issue when you're making a video game. When my favorite parts of a game are the cutscenes, and I dread getting into a combat encounter, dread getting into that next stealth segment, dread having to slog through the next open world exploration area that really only exists to serve as padding and really offers nothing by means of meaningful exploration or rewards for doing so, I just can't shake the feeling that this is a terrible game that should have just been a movie. And that is the number one takeaway I have after completing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. The parts of this game I hated the most were the actual gameplay segments, and that is definitely an issue walking away from it. But overall, I don't want to say it was a bad experience, because again, I did like certain aspects of it. And I do think, like, honestly, if Machine Games wanted to make like an animated Indiana Jones movie in this style with Troy Baker playing Harrison Ford's, Indiana Jones character, I think it actually could do pretty well. Like, I think there is something there. It's just the problem is the gameplay, and more specifically the combat, which let's go ahead and get into that, because that is by far, I think, the weakest part of this game, hands down. Like I mentioned, the combat of Indiana Jones is by far the weakest point and easily my least favorite part of this game, 100%. The game is about bashing the fash, punching Nazis, whatever the fuck you want to say. The problem is that is never actually fun in this game at any point. Now, the first-person perspective, I think, is fine for the most part. I think third-person definitely would have been the way to go if I had my say in the matter, but whatever. The first-person perspective is okay when you're traversing the environment. It's okay when you're solving puzzles or making your way through a tomb or walking to the next objective. The issues don't really come into play until you have to engage in combat, because melee combat in this game feels absolutely jank. Enemies take way too many hits and just way too long to actually kill for it to ever be fun, and the stamina system compounds that issue by making it downright miserable to engage in combat in any any sort of manner. Like, I did not have fun with the combat at fucking all in this game, because this has to be one of the worst stamina-based combat systems I have ever seen in a modern video game, especially a modern AAA video game, and that is definitely saying something. I mean, it just downright makes the combat absolutely fucking miserable to deal with, and in a lot of cases, you're going to be draining your stamina bar multiple times just in order to take down a singular fucking enemy, dude. You have to wait for that motherfucker to recharge just in order to finish off a guy that you've already punched 6 times, but you just have to wait for this arbitrary stamina meter to refill in order to continue the fight. So it's just, it never feels good, man. And God forbid you ever have to fight multiple enemies at the same time, because as you will see in this clip, it almost never ends well.
How's this? Schnippt ihm das Licht aus!
Non mi hai fatto niente!
Das nennst du einen Kampf?
And that's not even to mention enemies that have this absolutely insane combat armor that makes them almost impossible to take down with the hand-to-hand combat. And don't even get me started on how long, drawn out, and unnecessarily fucking spongy the boss fights are in this game, which obviously I'm not going to spoil if you want to watch, play this game for yourself. So yeah, just know that every single boss in this game is based on hand-to-hand combat where you have no weapons. I think you can have guns, but they do almost next to no damage whatsoever, so they don't really matter. But 99% of the boss fights in this game are pure hand-to-hand combat, and they are absolutely miserable to get through. Now, granted, you can pick up random items in the environment that do boost your damage output a little bit. The problem is somehow they saw Breath of the Wild's breakable weapon system and said, yo, we gotta one-up that shit on making it even more shitty, and decided to make weapons break after swinging them 3 times. So they don't really do you a lot of good, and with how bad it is to pick up items off the ground because of how jank the mechanic is, it's not really a reliable means to tackle combat encounters. So a lot of times you might be able to take out one enemy faster than you would have otherwise, but it doesn't really do you a bit of good in the long term because of how undurable weapons are. Apparently, if you hit a motherfucker over the head with a lead pipe, the pipe breaks, not their skull. So very interesting from that perspective, to say the least. Now, granted, there are also guns in the game, but they are absolutely horrible. The balancing is so bad that the pistol is more powerful than the assault rifle and the shotgun. The enemies are insane bullet sponges and basically just eat ammo while killing you in 1 to 2 shots.
Vielleicht triffst du nächstes Mal. Das ist ein mieser Schütze. Jetzt wird dich niemand mehr retten. Das ist nicht lustig. Es reicht. Keine Gnade mehr. Schlag ihm die Fresse rein. Braucht Munition. Eindringling. Mist. Aber sofort. Auf ihn. Verdammt. Auf ihn zielen. Ich lade nach.
I don't know about you guys, but doesn't that combat look absolutely incredible? But on top of that, I wasn't joking when I said the pistol is more effective than the shotgun, because here's a clip of me shooting people at point blank range with a shotgun and doing basically no damage.
Hey, betreten verboten!
Fast ihn! Oh nein! Erwischt! Hör auf zu schießen!
Muss nachladen. Munition ist alle! Lade nach! Hast mir nichts verloren?
And then when you take all of this stuff that I mentioned and pair that with annoying traversal jank, you get amazing moments like this.
Muss nachladen!
Don't you just love it when the environment in Bethesda games get you killed? It truly never gets old. But the thing that makes this even more unforgivable, especially in the aspect of the shooting mechanics, is that Machine Games has a history in the first-person shooter genre. These are the people who made the Wolfenstein Reboot series, which has absolutely incredible first-person shooter combat. I don't know what the fuck happened here to make it feel as bad as it does. It's so bad that you can't even shoot through glass windows to headshot an enemy because the game thinks that it's a solid object. And yes, this is a game studio whose past 4 games have all been first-person shooters. What's crazy is you can't even stow or reload weapons at all. If you do anything in this game, your weapon drops. You climb a ladder, Indiana Jones drops his weapon. You jump on top of something, he drops his weapon. You dare to heal yourself, he drops his fucking weapon. Imagine being in the middle of a firefight, and all of a sudden you're like, damn, my health is getting low, I better heal myself. So you use your healing item, and in the process, you throw your gun halfway across the room, and you're struggling to find it on the ground and pick it back up so that you can start shooting again. But by the time you do that, your health is already back down to the point it was before you healed in the first place. So this game, I don't know what the fuck happened. I don't know how a first-person shooter studio like Machine Games managed to shit out this absolutely awful combat system. But here we are, man. This is absolutely incredibly bad, and I really can't believe that this actually is the case for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Like, I would have expected a lot more from the studio that brought us the Wolfenstein reboots. Now, in a lot of cases when it comes to combat, stealth is really your only option because of all the things I mentioned before. You know, you die almost instantly to bullets, enemies take so damn long to kill that there's no feasible way that even with guns you're going to be able to take out all of them at once. So luckily it is Bethesda stealth, and you can kind of just brute force your way through a lot of it. In a lot of instances, I just ran right through groups of enemies, completely ignoring them, and eventually I was able to get to the objective without having to worry about stealthing my way through it or fighting enemies. So you can do that if you're really just pissed off, because the enemy AI is absolutely fucking terrible in this game.
Ayuno, one more time! We're starting.
Quick for you.
We're starting.
But yeah, I feel like I'm just beating a dead horse at this point. The combat in this game feels like a complete afterthought at best, and it's really no wonder they were hesitant to show any extended gameplay prior to the launch of this game whatsoever. I mean, just to make it even worse, let me just harp on one little last thing. I mean, bro, this game had such shitty combat that they didn't even make sure that something as simple as throwing a stick of dynamite worked. So now that we've really hammered home just how bad the combat is, let's go ahead and talk about the other element of the gameplay experience, and that is the exploration. Now, the exploration mechanics and structure of the game is actually pretty decent for the most part, at least in the more linear segments of the game, which is like the tombs and, you know, areas that you actually make real story progress in. Those areas are actually really well done for the most part. It's just the open exploration zones absolutely suck, man, and they are pure filler. And the one that you find at the end of the game, like set in Southeast Asia, it is mind-numbingly boring to navigate because straight out of God of Snore, you have to literally sit in a fucking boat and traverse through rivers in order to get from point A to point B in between missions. And for 3 to 5 minutes, you get to cruise down the river God of War style. Like I said, guys, this is basically a Sony game through and through, but without the, I guess, benefit of having somewhat mediocre combat. This time around, the combat is absolutely terrible, but I do find it funny that the same people that typically shit on the Sony movie game formula are all of a sudden absolutely loving this shit, dude. But Egypt is the other zone that I really did not like as far as the open exploration zone, and it's really no better. You're constantly running across the massive Giza area instead of riding in your boat, at least, so I guess that's a little bit better, but you're basically not doing anything of real value. Basically, one of the examples that I came across in playing through the main campaign, which absolutely drove me crazy, is you had to run over to the Sphinx, you talk to somebody in the Sphinx, you then had to run all the way across the zone, go talk to somebody else, then you had to run all the way back to the Sphinx. Well, now you talk to that person again, now it's time to leave the Sphinx once again and go to a completely different side of the map, and then you get whatever you needed over there, and then you go back to the Sphinx to finally get into the actual story content of that particular area. So honestly, pure padding mechanics through and through. I mean, just to further prove my point, there are literal exploration blocks in this game that force you to explore the open world in order to buy some arbitrary item that's sold at a shop in that particular zone that Indiana Jones needs to progress the story. And in one case, which was in Giza, he needed to go and buy a lighter, because a lighter is totally something that Indiana Jones would leave home without if he was going to explore ancient ruins and tombs where, I don't know, maybe they don't have electricity?
Maybe this would tease open your money pouch. Yes, a lamb.
Not bad. How much?
From beautiful Vienna, I can barely part with it, but I will sell it for a very, very good price to you, sir.
Let me think about it. If I'm gonna be crawling around Egyptian tombs, a lighter would come in handy.
Excellent lighter. I bought it from the lighter is yours.
But yeah, each zone basically has a similar block to go and force people who didn't explore it all to go back and try to find some money scattered throughout the environment, which can actually be kind of hard to find in certain circumstances. So that part was definitely annoying. But for the linear segments of the game, I actually thought they were pretty great, especially the tombs, man. When you're exploring the ancient ruins, solving puzzles, and actually looking for the treasure and the actual stones you're collecting throughout the campaign, I actually thought those moments were pretty good, all things considered. The only section of the game that was linear that I didn't really like is when you go to find Gina's sister in the ship that's stranded in the middle of the mountains. So that to me was an awful mission because of the armored enemies and the amount of enemies wielding shotguns that could basically one-shot you. So yeah, that was not exactly a fun time, but the rest of the linear segments I actually really enjoyed. Like the one in Southeast Asia towards the end of the game, I thought was really well done, and I genuinely had fun exploring that one at times. So you could kind of see a glimmer of something here that with a little more time, maybe a little more focus on actually crafting a good and fun game to play, this might have actually turned out a lot better than it actually did. And it almost makes me wish they would have completely skipped the combat and open areas of this game entirely, because I genuinely did not enjoy those aspects whatsoever. So next up, I do want to talk about the traversal itself. I don't really have too much to say here. I think traversing the environments feels okay. I do wish it was in third person, because going from first person to third person gets super jarring after a while. And there's a lot of instances too where it's just general jank, where you feel like you're about to jump and you're going to hit the edge and be able to climb up, but you just don't connect, and then you do the exact same thing the next time and then it works out perfectly fine. So there's definitely a little bit of jank there. And then there's also examples too where I was trying to lower myself with my whip and it just straight up would not let me drop off of it. There were also instances where I was trying to get through a doorway and an NPC would come in at the same time, and I was unable to progress.
Through here. So dark in here.
But aside from that and the overall whip swinging mechanic being a little bit janky here and there, I think everything feels good for the most part. Exploring the tombs and solving puzzles is genuinely an enjoyable experience in this game. So that is definitely a highlight for me. And like I said, if they removed all the stealth, the combat, and the unnecessary open world segments of this game, I think it actually could have been something really unique and special. I just know that like they maybe didn't have the balls to make a game without combat, which I guess I kind of get, but I would almost rather have no combat than bad combat, which is kind of crazy for me of all people to be saying if you know anything about my taste in gaming. But overall, man, I think the traversal and exploration aspect of this game is definitely a highlight. So with that shit said, man, I think we've covered all of the gameplay here, so let's go ahead and move on to the main attraction, which is the story. So the story for Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is obviously the main draw of this game. It's the reason you're buying it. It's the reason you're probably interested in it. And in my opinion, it's the only reason that this game is even remotely worth experiencing, whether you play it or watch it on YouTube. And that, of course, is because, as the narrative designer himself said, this is Indiana Jones made for
a modern gaming audience.
I want to say this game feels like a rehash of the plot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is kind of ironic because the game itself actually opens up with the intro scene recreated from Raiders of the Lost Ark in video game form with a 1-to-1 recreation. But the best way I think I can put this in context of how it fits into the Indiana Jones, I guess, franchise is this feels like the Force Awakens moment of Indiana Jones. If you needed any more proof that Microsoft is the Disney of gaming in this situation, but like the Force Awakens, it took the plot of A New Hope, basically updated it for a modern gaming audience.
For a modern gaming audience.
And made just enough changes where it could stand on its own as its own individual title. So that's not to say the story is bad. It's just veering on the side of very predictable because it feels like you've seen this before, and that goes all the way until the very, very end where the main villain is stopped. So I'm not going to give a specific spoiler until we get into this spoiler section of the review. So if you don't want to be spoiled on the story, skip past the story portion of this video. The timestamps will be in the description below, so you have been warned. So from here on out, we will be going into spoilers. Now, I will not be doing a full plot breakdown, but I just want to say that this is definitely a game that was made for
a modern gaming audience.
So at the start, Indiana Jones is at his college. Someone breaks in, steals a cat mummy artifact, which leads him to the Vatican. Then he goes to Egypt. Then he goes to a ship that has magically transported into the middle of a mountain peak. He then is transported to World War II Japan for a total of 5 minutes, and then to Southeast Asia in order to find the last and final stone that forms the Great Circle before the big bad inevitably gets all the stones and then completes his grand design, which is revealed at the very end to be Noah's Ark. That's right, all of these stones that he's been collecting throughout the game essentially go into the steering wheel of Noah's Ark, and you can use Noah's Ark to fast travel in real life.
Inserting the stones into the wheel of the Ark and speaking the words in the correct order will grant me the power to travel to any location I want in an instant.
You know, when they first revealed the whole Noah's Ark thing, I was not thinking of literally fast traveling, dude. So, I mean, I guess it's unique. I was thinking like more along the lines of, the Nazis loading up Noah's Ark with a bunch of German officers and Aryans or whatever, using the Ark to activate an apocalyptic flood that wipes the entire Earth clean of the racially impure so that they can repopulate the Earth as truly God's chosen people and lead on 10,000 years of dominate, whatever the fuck. Like, I obviously had much grander designs, but in reality, they just wanted to use Noah's Ark to teleport around, I guess, to skip rush hour traffic and drop off a few tanks here and there, which, kind of was, I don't know, disappointing. When I first heard it, I had to pause the game because I was laughing at just how funny it was, but overall, man, definitely not the payoff I was hoping for. I definitely had much grander ambitions than the Nazis did in this game, apparently. But I guess over in Germany, that Autobahn traffic is getting to be a fucking bitch, so anytime you could save at the end of the workday makes it worthwhile. Dude, honestly, I will say that's creative. I was not expecting that whatsoever. Do I think it's the best motivation for a villain I've ever heard, especially given the circumstances of what they're using? Absolutely fucking not. So I think the writing department could have used a little help on that one. Feel free to call me in the future, Microsoft. I'm more than happy to consult on the story itself, but the main mission in this game is to solve the Great Circle mystery and not only punch Nazis, but also bash the Italian fash as well, and even the surprise Japanese samurai, which I actually thought was kind of cool. I wish they would have done more in Japan. Like, Japan is part of World War II, people. Like, it would have been actually cool to have an Indiana Jones story set in Imperial Japan, because we've never really seen that before. So that could have been something they could have done to really differentiate themselves, but you only get a 5-minute glimpse at most. That's the part in the trailers you see where you're shooting people in the back of a plane. That's that section of the game, if you're curious. It only lasts about 5 minutes, so don't get your hopes up. But throughout this story, Indiana Jones is unfortunately joined by his Sony-esque companion character who just can't seem to shut her mouth. That, of course, being Gina. And she is one of the worst companion characters I have ever seen in one of these Sony-style movie games, because she just cannot shut the fuck up, dude. She's a constant know-it-all girl boss who basically already knows everything before Indiana Jones says it, and I really just can't think of anything positive to say about her. I genuinely enjoyed the game so much more until she appeared, and the moments where she is not present on screen are actually genuinely enjoyable. Like, the 2 sections of the game I actually really enjoyed were the parts that she was not there, ironically, so take that as you will, but constantly she is girl bossing her way through this. Indiana Jones is constantly getting bailed out by her more times than you can count. She saves his life on countless different occasions.
Well, I hope you didn't... I've got you.
Good reflexes.
And what's funny about this too is she's a bumbling idiot herself, because there's a point in the game at the very end where you're confronting the final villain and she points a gun at him but didn't bother to check if it actually had fucking ammo in it.
You will never understand.
Perdóname, Gina. Te ho mentito.
All'inferno, vas!
Ihr könnt jetzt reinkommen. Drawn to the memory of your dead sister like a rat to a stinking piece of cheese.
And in addition to that, she also suffers a symptom of the modern Sony game experience, which is Marvel tier writing that exists solely to fill dead air.
Meet me on the other side. Don't burn yourself. It's getting hotter. So hot. I can barely breathe. The fire is getting stronger. There.
Thanks for the help.
Hey, there's a dragon up there.
I can see.
And I think what amplifies this problem even more is the fact that Indiana Jones as a character just feels really deflated in this game. Like, none of that charisma, none of that, like, snarky, snide remarks where, you know, he's firing back or talking shit, returning the fucking blows, whatever you want to say, where, like, in the movies, if a woman or whoever is talking shit, you know, he fires back in kind with no issue whatsoever. But in this game, he almost feels emasculated in a sense, and he reminds me of that meme where it's like, yes, honey. You know, that's kind of the vibe I got throughout this entire game. And I think the perfect example of this happening is she is the one who has to convince Indiana Jones to see things through, because at the very final hour, Indiana Jones wants to run away from all of his problems, you know, let the Nazis have Noah's Ark, and he just wants to go back to his normal life. But, you know, girl boss Gina has to convince him that no, they need to stick it out and see things through because the fate of the world is at hand.
We gotta get out of here.
We can't just leave now. We have to go after Voss.
I can't lose you.
Come on. Don't you want to know what this is all about?
You're damn right I do.
I mean, I am no lore autist of Indiana Jones, but after seeing the first 4 movies, I could tell you he never acts that way, especially in the final hour. Like, he's always the one pushing forward, having to convince others that this is necessary, and that the fate of the world to stop the Nazis is a worthwhile endeavor, which, that's what I mean. It just, Indiana Jones feels uncharacteristically reserved, and almost like a bitch at times, man, for lack of a better term. He, like, literally seems like a little pussy-ass bitch in a lot of different scenarios. And they're constantly making him reliant on Gina and making him look like a bumbling fool who really has no idea what the fuck he's talking about. He's constantly having to have things explained to him in his particular area of expertise, and they almost make him completely incapable of going it alone, which is just so uncharacteristically Indiana Jones. Like, the prime example is there's a recurring joke throughout the game about his fear of snakes, but it's done in a way that's so comically cringe and over the top that it just makes you hate the writers for what they're doing to a beloved character.
Gina.
Jones?
Gina!
Oh. Stay still.
I am being still.
Don't move.
Now, yes, Indiana Jones has always been afraid of snakes, but in any of the movies, he would have just brushed that off nervously and maybe been like, ugh, like, you know, he would have been fine. But in this, he literally freezes up and is incapable of moving on his own until Gina comes in and saves the day. But overall, man, the tone of this game is just all over the place. It definitely leans more towards the goofy / Marvel-esque writing, which, you know, Indiana Jones is definitely not a 100% serious franchise, but it does kind of feel out of place. Like, there is one scene in particular that is basically completely ripped right out of Looney Tunes.
I have killed many men like you.
Hey!
And then when you pair moments like that with story cutscenes having major issues from a technical standpoint, it's kind of hard to take it seriously.
You did this, Joe. You sabotaged my experiment. It was perfect. I'm going to kill you all.
Tut. Of course. So what, Ikra?
And don't you worry, all you current thing followers out there. This game is littered with all the typical talking points that we expect from the modern video game landscape.
Wissen Sie, Bergmann, willensschwache Männer sind am einfachsten zu manipulieren. The giant is correct. Because that is what you are inside, Dr. Jones. A pathetic little man.
And no, I am not kidding when I say this. I actually kind of found this hard to believe when I first booted it up. I had to do a double take and look at my recorded footage just to confirm, but this game literally has a trigger warning at the beginning of it because, oh my god, dude, it has Nazis in it, be careful. But yeah, it gives an imagery warning at the beginning of the game, and it says, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a fictional story inspired by historical events and characters. Name, characters, organizations, locations, and events are either imaginary or depicted in a fictionalized manner, not intended to disrespect any historical or cultural beliefs. The story and contents of this game are not intended to and should not be construed in any way to condone, glorify, or endorse the beliefs, ideologies, events, actions, persons, or behavior of the Nazi and fascist regimes, nor any other regimes, or to trivialize any war crimes, genocide, and or other crimes against humanity. Now, I don't really know why this was necessary. I thought it was kind of a universally accepted thing that, you know, Nazis equal bad. I don't know why they needed to reinforce that, but dude, this shit's absolutely fucking crazy. I absolutely hate the fucking world we live in nowadays, man. Everybody is so fucking soft, dude. And on top of that, there are other just really cringe moments in the game that, of course, come from Gina, of all people, that I just had to pause the game because of just how categorically fucking false and cringe they are, that it made me actually sympathize with the people I'm supposed to hate.
Nazis don't care about history, Dr. Jones. They only care about power.
I mean, this statement literally made me pause the game out of just pure cringe, because if you know anything about Nazi Germany, they were hyper autistically obsessed with recreating their vision of historical Germany and reuniting historically German peoples. Like, the entire motivation, you could argue, for Hitler and the Nazis was based on history. So to say that the Nazis don't care about history is absolutely fucking retarded, dude. And there's just plenty of moments like that throughout the campaign that are scattered in there that just take you completely out of the experience. The original Indiana Jones movies did not have to make up shit like that. They simply presented it how it was, and everybody walked away thinking the Nazis were the bad guys. They didn't have to do this over-the-top fucking shaming and bullshitting in order to try and convince you that you're actually the good guys in this situation. And I think it's perfectly summed up with this absolutely motivational and moving speech from Gina.
Oh, for God's sake! Who cares? You are both stuck in the past. And right now there is a great evil spreading throughout the world. And we can choose to fight against it or each other. Nazis don't care about history, Dr. Jones. They only care about power.
Also, something funny I found is that it's no coincidence that the only likable and attractive female character in this game, who is a former student of Indiana Jones, who has blonde hair and blue eyes, of course, turns out to be a Nazi conspirator.
This is the idol of Yaksha. I first found it described in a barely readable passage in a scroll found in Angkor Wat. The Khmer warriors who found the idol believed it was cursed, and so they buried it along with the demon. I didn't know if it was real, or just a legend.
Well, savor the feeling, kid. It was your thorough research that led us to it.
Tak, Professor. We should leave.
You know, they made her character from Sweden, not Germany, to show that it wasn't just only the Germans after all, man. But it is kind of funny because she is actually very likable. She has a great energy about her. She complements Indiana Jones's personality perfectly. And not to mention, she was actually hot. And what's sad is the plot could actually have been better if they went with her as the primary companion character instead of Gina. Like, they could have used a similar pretense for her meeting up with Indiana Jones. They both were tracking down the same thing. They team up, and given their past history as him being her teacher and her being a student, you know, that could have actually been a really cool dynamic, and it could have actually led to a more interesting story where eventually it's revealed that Anika has been working with the Nazis the whole time, and she was planted there because of her connection with Indiana Jones to betray him and find out what he knows about the Great Circle in order to help them track down the stones faster. But instead, we got girl boss Gina, who wanted to track down her 300 IQ sister, who literally is never even on screen once other than as a corpse. So yeah, there you go. But overall, man, I think Anika would have actually been a much better companion character, and it kind of gives you a glimpse at what could have been, and then you have to go right back to the old hag once again, which, you know, just truly brings a tear to my eye, because for all things, man, Anika was definitely hot. Unfortunately, though, she was only in the game for about 30 minutes and meets an untimely end when a door falls and crushes her arm, which causes her to leave behind the idol that she betrayed Indiana Jones for earlier to get for the Nazis.
You drop the idol and reach back to grab it. Guess you reached too far, kid. Should bring this back to Pyland. You let your ambitions get the better of you.
I will say, even with one arm, she probably is still 10 times better than Gina. All in, though, the story, for the most part, is pretty predictable. You've definitely seen this before if you've seen the other Indiana Jones films. It is very reminiscent of Raiders of the Lost Ark, with kind of like that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull element of trekking around the globe to find the various different stones in order to create the Great Circle, which, you know, is pretty similar to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but the way the villain dies is the exact same way as in Raiders of the Lost Ark, essentially, so you will definitely be feeling like you're treading through familiar water throughout the story, but they do enough to keep it interesting to the point where you are genuinely interested to see how it does play out by the end, to its credit. But I did think it's funny, speaking of credits, in typical Bethesda fashion, they somehow managed to find a way to send you off in true Bethesda style and somehow managed to break the end credits of the game. But all bullshit aside, I did think the story did check enough boxes to give you that authentic Indiana Jones experience, and I do think the story was definitely the highlight of this game. It was just dragged down by some bad characters and overall bad Marvel-esque writing. So aside from that, man, I did actually, for the most part, enjoy the moments of this game I was not playing. So, aka the story. I think the story was actually pretty good, and I think it's worth experiencing whether you want to watch it or play it for yourself. But yeah, let's go ahead and wrap this review up, man. This has gone on more than long enough at this point. So I think I can best sum up Indiana Jones and the Great Circle as a good experience, but a terrible video game. The best parts of this game, which for me is very hard to say, are the cutscenes and the non-combat segments that take place in the linear tombs. And what you're going to be walking away from after playing this game is you're going to wish that this was a movie that you could have just watched instead of having to slog through the slop combat and stealth segments that really add absolutely nothing to the experience overall other than frustration. So I think that is the biggest flaw with this game. They took what should have been a 2 to 3 hour long movie story and used awful gameplay mechanics to stretch it out to 12 hours. And that's what it feels like. I feel like this game would have actually been a lot better if they would have really just doubled down on the puzzles and got rid of combat altogether. I think that honestly would have been a much better decision, and it probably would have been a much more fun experience. And at the same time, the story really isn't anything special. It's pretty much just recycled themes from the original Indiana Jones movies from George Lucas, which I think is fine if that's what they're going for. On top of that, I thought Troy Baker actually did a very good job as Indiana Jones. There were a couple times throughout the game where you can tell it's not Harrison Ford, but for the most part, man, I'd say 90% of the time, he does a very, I would say, convincing interpretation of Harrison Ford throughout this game. So he actually did a very good job. I think the game, like I mentioned, really shines in those non-combat linear tombs where you're solving puzzles and exploring and taking in the scenery. I think that's where the game truly does what it's trying to set out to do, and I wish it was more of that and less of the open world zones, less of the slop, stealth, and melee combat, and the awful gunplay as well. But overall, man, I didn't hate this. I really didn't hate it. And it might sound like I'm being overly negative, but it's just so much easier to pinpoint the things that you don't like when you're talking about a game, and I think that's more important for reviews, because if you're just going, oh, I loved it, I loved it, I loved it, I loved it, that doesn't really give you an idea of why you love it. So I like to bring up the negatives, but I did not hate this game. I absolutely did not hate it. I just am more neutral on it. I hated the combat and the gameplay experience, but I thought the story and the overall exploration in those linear segments of the game was actually really good. Like, it gives you a glimpse at what this game could be if they refine the formula in the future for a potential sequel. So if I were to give this game a rating, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10, which for me is above average. I think this is definitely through and through a Sony movie game with terrible gameplay and a first-person perspective. I'm not really a fan of when Sony makes this style of game, and I'm not really a fan of when Indiana Jones is adapted into this style of game, despite my love for the Indiana Jones franchise. But overall, again, I did not hate this. I think it does have some redeeming qualities. Honestly, I just would have rather watched a playthrough on YouTube instead of playing it for myself, and I think that speaks volumes. So I cannot rate the game higher than that. I do think it succeeds at creating a faithful and immersive Indiana Jones experience that's just weighted down by awful writing at times and some of the worst first-person combat I have ever seen in a video game. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for this review of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. If you did make it to the end of this video, you are a real one. Make sure to smash that like button and let me know in the comment section below your thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Have you played it? Are you skipping it? What did you think? Are you waiting for it to come to PS5? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'm always interested to hear y'all's take on whatever game it is we're talking about today. But as always, I do want to thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to check out this video and for all the recent support on the channel. You guys are the fucking best, and I really do appreciate it. So with that shit said, I will catch you guys next time.